All right, let's dive into a huge question, one that really gets to the very foundations of the world we live in.
I mean, think about it. We usually credit the Enlightenment, right? Or maybe the ancient Greeks and Romans. But what if the bedrock of Western civilization? I'm talking about the very ideas that make our world recognizable. What if it all came from a single, and honestly, pretty surprising source?
Well, that's the provocative thesis we're exploring today from Indian scholar Vishal Mangalwadi's book, The Book That Made Your World. And let me tell you, its central argument is definitely a conversation starter. So here's Mangalwadi's central claim. The Bible, it provided the essential blueprint for the West's greatest achievements. He's arguing that everything, from human dignity to modern science, has its roots in a biblical worldview. It's a bold claim, for sure. So let's unpack that, starting with one of our most basic, fundamental values. Okay, so first up, the book dives into one of the most fundamental ideas we have, that every single person has value. But here's the thing, Mangalwadi argues that this wasn't always just, common sense. And this isn't just some abstract philosophical idea. The book grounds this argument in a really heartbreaking personal story. See, Mangalwadi and his wife tried to save a young girl named Sheila, but her parents were trapped in a totally different worldview. They didn't see her as a precious life. They saw her as a burden, something to be discarded. So this tragic story really highlights what the book presents as a fundamental clash of worldviews. On one side, you've got this fatalistic view where a person's value is all about their utility. Are you an asset or are you a liability? But on the other side is the view Mangalwadi was pushing for, which he says comes straight from the Bible, that every single person has intrinsic worth, a basic right to life, no matter how useful they are. So according to the book, this whole idea of intrinsic worth comes from one single really powerful concept, the imago Dei, which means image of God. The logic is pretty straightforward. Because humans are made in God's image, every single one of us has a dignity that you can't earn and nobody can take away. And the book argues this was a totally revolutionary idea, something you just didn't find in classical Greek or Roman philosophy, which, widely accepted things like infanticide. Okay, so how in the world does this lead to something like modern science? Well, the book's next big argument is that this very same worldview didn't just protect human life, it actually created the conditions that made science even possible. The claim here is that science isn't just, test tubes and observation. It actually rests on a set of really deep assumptions about what reality is. And without those assumptions, the whole project of science, it doesn't even get off the ground. I mean, just think about it for a second. To even be a scientist, you have to believe a few things first. You got to believe the universe is real, not just some big illusion. You have to believe it follows consistent, predictable laws, not just the random whims of chaotic spirits. And this is a big one. You have to believe that our human minds can actually understand those laws. The book's core argument here is that the biblical worldview provided exactly that intellectual framework, which was totally different from many other worldviews out there. And to back this up, Mangalwadi points to the philosopher Alfred North Whitehead. Whitehead concluded that this inexpugnable belief, this unshakable faith in a rational, ordered universe, which is really the engine of science, came directly from the medieval belief in a single, rational, personal creator. The idea was actually pretty simple. A rational God made a rational universe, and he made us rational so that we could figure it out. Okay, so this same worldview, the book argues, also explains why technology, especially labor-saving technology, blossomed so uniquely in the West. It's all connected. The argument here pretty much unfolds in 3 steps. First, you have to desacralize nature, stop worshiping it, which allows you to study it. Second, this new emphasis on compassion creates a real desire to ease human suffering. But the third step, man, that was the real game changer. It was a theological distinction made by Christian monks. They started to see creative work as a good, godlike thing, but saw mindless, dehumanizing toil as a curse that people should try to overcome. And this new way of thinking led to a really profound goal. Let's liberate people from the kind of drudgery that animals or, wind and water could do instead. This wasn't just about being more efficient. It was a moral, even a spiritual mission to restore human dignity. And according to the book, that's what drove the invention of things like the heavy plow, the wheelbarrow, and water mills. All these technologies that freed people from mindless toil and allowed for a more complex civilization to be built. But the book doesn't just look at the past.
It actually ends with a pretty sobering warning about what happens when a civilization decides to cut itself off from the very ideas that built it in the first place. To frame just how high the stakes are, Mangalwadi brings in a quote from George Orwell. Now, Orwell was an atheist, but even he recognized that sawing off a civilization's spiritual branch could have horrifying consequences. He called it the amputation of the soul, and he warned that it leads to a massive moral void. So the book argues that as the West has started to reject its biblical foundation, what it calls its sacred canopy, it's entered a period of decadence. The idea is that our universities can produce these brilliant technicians, these robots, but they struggle to even define what a good man is. We can figure out how to travel to Mars, but we've kind of lost the instruction manual for how to live well in our own homes right here on Earth, right?
So, the book's ultimate, really challenging claim is this. The West's most celebrated values, things like individual dignity, rationality, science and technology, they weren't just some happy accident. The argument is that they were grown piece by piece directly from the soil of a biblical worldview.
And that leaves us with a really profound question, doesn't it? If a civilization is built on a single book, what happens when it stops reading it? Whether you agree with the book's premise or not, it really forces you to think about that connection, the one between our deepest beliefs and the kind of world we end up building.